this is the time to do the right thing. This is the time to act. Firstly, I would like to welcome Mr. Suresh Prabhu, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, India. He plays a critical role in shaping the official agenda of the Government of India's key contributions for the G7 and G20 summit and lead on crucial conversations on India's NDCs. Welcome, Mr. Prabhu. Just to start with my first question, there is an urgency for climate action, and India as a country is cognizant of this urgency. How has the COVID situation affected our commitment?
We are aware of the huge climate crisis which is facing the world, not just today, but for a fairly long time now. And rather than there is getting lower of climate related issues, in fact, it is increasing by the day. And the reason for that is that global community has failed to act on climate change, despite the fact that the best efforts put in by several countries to reach some kind of an accord globally. We had luckily a Paris Accord, but some countries walked out and it has become very ineffective. In fact, since the Kyoto Protocol, we have really not made any significant progress in terms of achieving a globally accepted, internationally binding commitment to be taken by the countries so that we can reduce the climate risk. As far as India is concerned, we are at the receiving end because our vulnerability to climate change is huge. The countries who are facing the problem, India would be probably the biggest country which is facing a climate problem because our agriculture, which is the mainstay of India's livelihood, is under threat because of climate change, because temperature going up would mean that some of the agriculture crops, which are staple food for the people, they will not be able to survive. The water crisis will again become very huge, and that again is going to happen because of exasperation of climate change issues. The challenges posed by climate change will also bring in more natural disasters, and that again is going to put huge burden on India's infrastructure to deal with that. So I think there are many challenges which will be coming in. India's response has been pretty good. We not only prepared an action plan to deal with it, but we also taken some sectoral action. For example, energy, which is one of the most critical part of mitigation as well as I would call it adaptation. The mitigation will mean that when we change the energy mix, the total emissions can go down significantly. And India is already on way to achieve the target of 100,000 megawatts of solar energy and 75,000 megawatts of wind energy. Besides, we are already working on energy conservation. In fact, I'm very lucky to say that as a power minister way back in 2020 years ago, we had initiated certain measures, including bringing a new law for the Electricity Act, but also energy conservation law, which is actually now preparing the mainstay for the energy conservation architecture. And I had set up the Bureau of Energy Efficiency more than 20 years ago. And that's why it is now building up on that, and we are trying to work on energy conservation issues. So I think all of that put together will have energy mix change. Yeah, starting public transportation in a significant way, which again will reduce emissions. We are working on lighting, which is actually because of urbanization, buildings would need it. So I think many initiatives which have been taken, including working on adaptation plan, which is very important. For a country like India, mitigation is important for global good, for our own good as well. But adaptation is very local because adaptation has to happen within the country, whereas mitigation efforts can be done globally. And adaptation is concerned, we are also having adaptation plan, but the cost of adaptation is so huge that we are going to work, will need a lot of support from the other countries as well. I think it's a time for preparing ourselves to avoid a crisis which is brewing and actually going to hit us in a very significant way. Like we are seeing today, US is affected by climate change, and in fact, the West Coast is burning today. So is the other parts of the world where there has been a huge temperature rise, probably the highest temperature recorded anytime, and that was meaning that we are heading into a big crisis. So, if, as you said correctly, if Corona and COVID are probably a tip of the iceberg, the world cannot face such a crisis which starts with only a virus. But just imagine, well, if we engulfed by a crisis of a magnitude that is going to be hitting us because of climate change, we are not prepared as a world to deal with that. And I don't want world to be prepared to face climate change crisis, but reduce the climate risk. That is how the world should respond. And that is where I don't see any action really emanating from the global community. In fact, the COPs which take place to deal with climate change are not becoming effective anymore. So I think I'm very happy that United Nations, though we have an agreement under United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, overall overarching agreement on dealing with climate change. But I'm happy that we are now working on it, and I'm very happy that the organization is actually taking some concrete steps. I think this is very important. We should make people aware of it, but more than now awareness, which can help in some way, a concrete global action matched by local initiatives, that is what is necessary to effectively deal with climate change.
Thank you, sir. That was really useful, and you've put things into perspective, and that brings me to a connecting question. So, given the conversation around the pandemic, the COVID-19 that you just spoke about, what are the benefits you see in greening the financial recovery post COVID, and how can this be done?
Of course, the huge financial costs that are caused by COVID are phenomenal. In fact, the contraction of global economy is significant.
Hmm.
National economies have suffered in a very big way. So I think this is another challenge for climate change. Why I'm saying this is because when there is no financial resources available, country will shy away from the responsibility of taking action on climate change. So while Corona actually provides us with a opportunity to avoid a future crisis, because we can actually feel that if we cannot deal with Corona, how can we deal with climate change? Because which is much, much bigger and a huge challenge. So one is the reminder about our obligations. But other challenge because of Corona is that because of contraction of economies, because of lack of financial resources, countries might delay the action that is really most needed at this particular time. Like it happened in 2008.
Right.
When 2008 banking and financial crisis happened, that was a time just after um, the big conference that we had in Copenhagen. And we are thinking that now action will happen because Copenhagen was such a very well designed uh, public discourse. But unfortunately, because of financial resources not being available, the countries postponed their obligation and they did not take any action. So now today, the contraction is far more severe than 2008, and economic crisis is far bigger than we could ever imagine, probably even after, even it is probably worse than even after Second World War. So because of that reason, and this is the probably the worst ever economic crisis that a modern world has ever seen, I hope it does not result into not taking action on climate change. So I think it's an opportunity because it creates a stark reminder to the climate change related threat, but also the financial situation becoming a little more challenging and alarming, countries might be forced to do that. So I think it's we have to look at it from two angles. One is a good angle, and one is a very unfortunate aspect of that.
That's right. That's right. And how do we spell out green finance in India in the next 10 years, for example?
When you say green, it actually, in my opinion, is a very relative term. I mean, if you are working and your carbon intensity is going down, or your energy intensity, is intensity is going down to the economy, both are in a way green. But I think we should
Right.
now go beyond it and think about. It's a good thing that we have to first reduce the carbon intensity. It's a very good thing. Energy intensity is also a good thing because energy in turn would actually affect emissions. But I think green would mean many more things. So, firstly,
Right.
we have to think about how do you ensure that even our real greening happens in the country. That is to increase the forest cover, to increase the green cover. That is also equally important. Making sure that businesses in India would adopt, each individual businesses will adopt green strategies. Individual community actions will be related to green aspect of that action. So greening is very important, but what is meant by greening has to be properly seen into perspective. Because actually, if you have more forest, obviously we have more carbon sinks. But we really now need to think about how do you ensure that carbon is actually is a threat, but of course some carbon is necessary in the atmosphere. So one possibility of new technologies need to be adopted. Like for example, carbon capture and usage is one technology which can help us to ensure that the green, if it's not greening, but it does not threaten green because it does not cause any greening to be thinned. So I would say greening is necessary, but avoiding thinning of greening is also necessary. So on one side, on positive
Correct.
side, you do greening, but on the negative side, you avoid thinning of greening, and that is why you need some technology. So I think green growth is absolutely, there is no question that whether we should have green growth or not. I think we have to
Yeah.
go beyond just this kind of cliches. It should not become a cliche anymore, but should have a very
Right.
concrete action on the ground. I'm very happy that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is actually working on a green growth for India by through various means, as I mentioned about the energy, because clean energy and issues like that. On the other side, increasing our green cover for the country and reducing the carbon footprint for India. I think all this put together would be the strategy for greening, and I'm very happy that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is leading the campaign to make it happen.
Thank you. That was very insightful, sir. And thank you so much for being with us
Thank you.
today. It
Thank you.
was a
Thank you.
pleasure talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.